And we're back. Welcome to the UX Usability Podcast, Season 2. It is incredible to be doing this again. My guest tonight is Douglas Ferguson, entrepreneur, human-centered technologist, and president of Voltage Control, an Austin-based workshop agency that specialises in design sprints and innovation workshops. Douglas' recent book, Beyond the Prototype, offers 6 clear steps to shift your mindset from ideas and discovery through to product launch. It's an absolute delight to have Douglas on the show tonight. So in tonight's conversation, we talk about life's greatest lessons for design, the secrets to success, and the role design can play in the fast evolving world of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter protests. So sit back, enjoy.
In this new world that we all find ourselves in, it's ever more important to be, what we call T-shaped. So, you might go very deep on design, UX, and even that domain has a lot of differentiation. Are you going to specialize in research? Are you going to specialize in animations? And there's a lot of things that you can get really, really good at and hone the craft on. But we have to have all this other knowledge and skill if we're going to integrate with other members of the team and actually make progress. And so I think that's great that you're looking at this through the lens of, well, how can this UX program benefit them in other ways? Because it's not just about creating something awesome, but it's like how do we get it out into the world?
Mm. So I heard that you're not just a designer, you're also a musician and producer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up with a piano playing mother, and was infatuated with the guitar and rock and rollers for many years. And in college, I was in punk bands, and then got into some more esoteric like math rock, and then started to do more instrumental, very Brian Eno influenced kind of soundtrack kind of work, and was involved in a couple films. And I still have my recording studio, and we've had some bands come through that are somewhat known, like Iron and Wine recorded at our studio. And
oh wow,
yeah, but running a startup and writing books is a little time consuming. So I don't find my way into the studio all that often, but it is the impetus for the name, because when I'm patching up my modular synthesizer, I can't help but relate it to the work that I do with teams and complex systems, because one little change will have ripple effects throughout the whole system, and it's and there's a unison and harmony that has to be established, like a balance, if you will, to make it really sing and make it really become functional and usable. And I think that the same is true for teams and organizations.
Do you find that your sort of the way you see music or art influences your sort of main job?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about work-life balance, and I'm kind of work-life fluid. I'm a big believer in recovery and time off, and if I compare it to my fitness regime, I train really hard, and I also do some very intentional recovery, and I think they both serve my overall goals and outcomes. And so yeah, I think everything that I do influences every other part. I'm a strong believer in compartmentalization. So, if I'm focusing on one thing, I really throw everything into that and focus on it. But it can't, your knowledge, your understanding, your thought patterns are going to be influenced. Doing music is going to open your mind to a different way of thinking, and then that thinking will inevitably find its way into the other work you do. And I think specifically patching the synthesizer has taught me a lot about systems thinking. And once I started really studying that work and cybernetics, et cetera, it really became clear to me how aligned all these things are. It's sort of like fractals, right? Nature tends to repeat itself. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with, when we look at these different facilitation practices and all these silos that exist. And when you examine them, there's a lot of similarities. Active listening, it permeates every single facilitation practice. But they all have their differences amongst the similarities. And I think it's really fascinating to study those edges, like where are they violently similar and where are they completely opposed? And there's magic in those areas because we can learn quite a bit about that. And sometimes people just found that these practices work, and then taking a step back and looking at, well, why does it work here but not over here? And that's where some interesting learning can happen.
Mm. So in your book, Beyond Prototype, you talk a lot about how you get these teams to work together and just create the next steps, like having race maps. And all this has been developed in a world where you can be in a room with somebody, you can interact in a very physical way. But obviously right now we're all on video channels, even if we live around the corner from each other. So do you think that COVID-19, the way we're working now, is going to completely change that culture? Or is it just a small blip in how we're currently working?
Yeah, I thought about this quite a bit and have discussed it a lot. The simple answer is it's going to change us. It's certainly not a small blip. And in fact, it's not even over. We're seeing numbers. I mean, at the point of this recording, we're seeing numbers in Austin rise again, along with Texas. And it's unclear when we'll be able to flatten that back out. And from graphs, it appears we're in a hockey stick kind of curve, which is a little frightening. So, and then there's conversations around a second wave, and I'll say there's a vaccine or a treatment that treats people very quickly, or or rapid testing to where we can identify people that are asymptomatic and spreading, then until that moment, we're all still in it. And so we're certainly not a blip, because it's and there's things that are going to need to be invented and created, and there's innovation that's going to need to happen across that space before we're out of it. And the one thing I'll say that is very notable is that our mindsets have shifted. We now have been forced into a situation where we work remote. So managers who thought they could never manage a remote team, or were, excuse me, or I'm going to get some water. Managers that thought they weren't good at managing remote teams, or were afraid of it, have now been thrust into that. They've been forced to learn. So now they've been upskilled in virtual and remote work. People have been exposed to tools that they didn't know existed before. The tooling's had to improve. I think there's a long way for the tooling to go. But I'm rest assured that Amazon AWS and Google Compute Cloud are feverishly working on stuff that I think would improve performance. Because if you think about video streams, if there's smart compositing and things, then anybody could start to use libraries that make it really easy to communicate online, and are super low bandwidth because it's doing intelligent things around compositing and combining and things. And so with all this attention on the tech and this notion that we can work this way, it's going to change people's mindsets even when we come back. So when it's safe to come together and work in person, we're going to notice some new ways that we approach that. And this reinventing of how we work and how we meet and how we collaborate is we're going to see phase 2 of that when we start to open back up, right? People aren't going to just go back to what they were doing before. They're going to be saying, well, now that I know what I know, how do we work differently? Now that I realize how powerful Mural is, for instance, like how might we work differently now that we are together? How can we use the power of of remote work and leverage the in-person stuff as well. Perhaps our in-person meetings are shorter, but more articulate, and we use that time more wisely. And then we go off and work remotely, asynchronously, for other parts of the workshop. So even though it's a 5-day workshop, maybe only 20-50% of the workshop is in person. And then we're reserving time to have some quick asynchronous, maybe our breakout rooms are separate meetings for that are asynchronous and remote. So I think it opens up a lot of design patterns that we wouldn't have considered otherwise, now that our minds are kind of exposed to the way of thinking.
Mm. So with all this sort of knowledge in your mind, if you had to go back in time to when you were 18 and sort of meet your younger self and sort of say, right, here's some knowledge for you, what would you tell yourself?
Wow. I'm 45, so my 18-year-old self had a lot to learn. I think that I would have told myself it's all about the people. I think at that time I hadn't quite learned the lesson. I think it was maybe, let's see, at 18, I might have been 5 to 10 years away from learning the lesson. Because I was still really infatuated with the technology and kind of the how. And so, getting more deeply into the purpose, the why, and the people, and focusing on how people can work better together. I think that getting an earlier start on that would have been really cool. But it's hard to say, It's like that age-old warning of don't disrupt the the fabric of time, because you don't know what ramifications there might be. But yeah, that's something that I look now, and I think it's and especially for folks that are maybe the 18-year-old version of me right now, is this notion of the people. And I think Patrick Lencioni maybe wrote about it the best when he talked about organizational health is so much more important than operational excellence. Mm-hmm. So what he means by that is so many people focus on operational excellence. What are the metrics? What are we driving for? We got to make sure we're really good at making these widgets. Well, if everyone hates their life because the process of making these widgets sucks, then that's not a great business, and you're not likely to innovate. And so if we first focus on organizational health, where there's a lot of trust and understanding, then the team's going to work better together. They're going to be able to maneuver obstacles much more efficiently. And this isn't about trust falls, right? This is about real, true trust and the teams that are working really well together. And I don't think we can model that through, trust falls or silly games. We have to get to something that's rooted in our purpose and our intention. And I think what excites me is that there's a whole new generation of organizational development type work and team alignment type workshops. And some of it is influenced by design thinking. There's a lot of HR professionals that are showing up at design thinking conferences, but there's certainly a lot of other silos of facilitation as well. And when we bring that work to the table, it can really strengthen teams and make them much stronger and make them work better together. And that this co-creation way of life, this mindset, is very powerful, and it will serve you well.
That's really interesting. And think about these remote silos talked about before. If people can be working in their homes more for a short time, then how people get their headspace when they're at home, how they relax. I wonder if that would influence the way that we think about problems. Of can we solve problems better if we're in the home environment, or is something special about actually leaving it and going to a new place that allows a clearer way of thinking?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, right? Certainly some folks work well from home. I think it has a lot to do with if you have a space that you feel comfortable working in. If you're in a tiny apartment and you and your partner are like, 3 feet away at the kitchen table, like pounding away, it makes it much more difficult. And that can put strain on relationships. It can be difficult to even have phone calls if that's something that's needed. And so space matters. We talk about this a lot in our facilitation training. Negative space can be really powerful. Shifting space can often be a design heuristic. There's actually some really cool design heuristics that were published I believe it was a couple of institutions here in the U.S., and I think maybe the lead one was Michigan. Mm-hmm. But it can be found because it's titled 77 Design Heuristics, and it's really cool stuff. It's just like, what if you rotate it? What if you put it to another use? What if you motorize it? What if you, so it's all these prompts of like, how do we think about this differently, right? And so shifting space can be really powerful. So to your point, like moving to another location can be transformative. And in complexity theory, there's this notion of like when you're moving from one state of or one domain to the other, you're moving through something that's called disorder. And so it's not really a domain in itself, but the point is like you can't just transition like a flip of a switch, right? And there's a state that you have to go through while you can almost think about like the molecules are coming apart and then coming back together to form a new domain. And one of the analogies that I love is Superman or Clark Kent, when he's turning into Superman, has to go into the phone booth. He can't just instantly turn into Superman. He goes into the space where he's transforming, or like or if you look at what is it? A caterpillar goes into a state where it is literally fluid. It's neither a caterpillar or a butterfly before it becomes the butterfly. And so I think that if we can mimic those experiences, it can be really powerful. And so a lot of folks talk about missing the drive home, because that drive home or drive to work was a nice space to have that experience. And so if you can design that into your day, even if you're at home, whether it's like go outside and do a circle around the house, or like walk to the mailbox and back, even if you don't need it, just some way to simulate a change of state can be really, really powerful. And what is that ritual where you move from, your morning activities into work?
So I've now got this amazing image in my mind of everyone installing sensory booths in their house. So when you got sort of stressful time, you go in there, listen to Brian Eno's, relax on some pillows, and find this new way of thinking.
Yeah, if you have the space to do those kinds of things, it's incredible. And I will say that another thing to think about is like dedicating areas of your house to different purposes, because then but again, you have to have the square footage and the space to dedicate, but there might be creative ways to slice it up, or maybe you even shift it with decoration or lighting. Like if the let's say the maroon lights are on, it's work time, and if you shift to the white lights, it's like like how can you shift the perception of your space so that you give some visual cues to your brain that we're now doing something different. It's it's similar to advice psychologists will give you. Don't do things in bed other than sleep if you want to have really good sleep.
Oh, that's controversial. I think I wrote my entire PhD was lying in bed.
Yeah, right.
I should tell my supervisor about that.
I break that rule all the time.
Yeah. There's lots of things we've been talking about so far about overcoming barriers. So if we could remove all barriers and you can just work on anything you want, what would you love to do?
Man, I really am enjoying working with teams and helping them find their true potential. Like when light bulbs go off and they realize that there is more juice to squeeze out of that rock, so to speak. And, I think maybe the best examples are when a manager comes to me and says that they didn't realize that they had capabilities on the team that they had, And so, creating these dynamics where the team can really shine and show their true selves is really, really amazing. And so, I guess that's on the level of training and transformation. When we're coming in and helping teams really, really discover some of these things about themselves and how they can perform better and have more fun. And so that's the journey we've been on. And I think if I really wouldn't change much there, because we're having a lot of fun doing it, and it's just really powerful to see that happen, especially when I see this happen on teams that are doing important work that I think is benefiting society. It's especially awesome because it's our little way of amplifying work that needs to be done. And so even though we're not directly doing that work, we kind of look at it as like, well, that was a force multiplier. We were able to like make the team that is doing this important work more efficiently. And the more teams that we can do that with that are doing important work, the more impact we can have on the world.
Training and transformation that benefits society. That sounds like a really fantastic way to live your life. Would you want that to define who you are, or do you think there's other things you want to be equally as important?
Right now I am really focused on this, like, how do we eradicate the world of horrible meetings? Because I think that they occupy so much of our time, and if we can improve that one thing, and everyone does them, there's no one that's immune to this feeling of, wow, that meeting was a waste of my time. And so, and honestly, a lot of the advice out there right now is like good, but it only scratches the surface. Like when someone tells you, oh, you should never have a meeting without an agenda. It's like, okay, yeah, but like most agendas are just blatantly just wrong because they're lists of topics. And if your agenda is just a list of topics, then, there's really not much of a plan of what you're going to do. So really thinking about like, what's the blueprint of my meeting and what's the arc that we're going to do? And are we actually using some good fundamentals and learning experience design? And also just generally like kind of structural elements that make for better decision making. I don't know. I've just been at this. I'm pretty fired up these days on how we go about ensuring that people just move past this problem, because it's been going on for way too long. And there's very simple fixes. It's not rocket science,
I loved in your book when you wrote about, I believe it was Boyle's law, always turn up to a meeting with a prototype of some kind, and then focus on action rather than just talking. And that's something which I've been encouraging all our students at Loughborough to do. So whenever we do tutorial, it's come on, show me your design and let's work it through. Lots of our listeners for the podcast are just starting out in the UX world, all looking to get their first job, and the job market is looking pretty uncertain. So what advice would you give to these people to achieve success, like avoid those issues?
Yeah, well, we have 10 meeting mantras that I think are really great places to start. And you mentioned the law around no prototype, no meeting. And one of our meeting mantras is very much inspired by that. And we take it a bit further, which is do the work in the meeting. And ultimately, again, good advice, but only scratching the surface. Everyone always says, don't leave your meeting without action items. But what if instead you did the work in the meeting? Then you wouldn't have to go then have a list of action items to then say, oh, let's go do the work now. Let's actually co-create the stuff and make progress on it. And then the action items tend to be a bit more clear, and they kind of just like, they almost just write themselves in a way, because it's like, oh, here are these things that are very clear, like next steps that need to be taken on the prototype, and usually the owners have emerged because and it's not arbitrary, because they're emerged because it's clear from the discussions where things are headed, and who's the right person to kind of push that forward on the next step. And so that one's really huge. I think another one is we talk about all meetings are optional, and this notion that if you don't think you can provide value, or you don't think that the meeting is you're going to benefit from it, or you're going to be able to provide value in the meeting, then don't show up. But it's important to have etiquette around that and inform the organizer that you're going to opt out. And I think that sentiment, or empowering people to work like that culturally is really incredible, because so often people just take it for granted. Okay, there's a meeting, I got to go, rather than like really thinking, is going to be a good use of time. And also, I think it's an opportunity to surface another issue, which is the word meeting is not very descriptive, and we use it for every time that people come together to do work. And whether it's two people just discussing what to have for lunch, or 20 people kicking off a project, it's like, oh, we're going to meet, we're going to have a meeting. And so being more specific about your taxonomy and your meeting culture, and we even have tooling where we help people design their meeting systems. So how meetings relate to each other, when it makes sense to have a meeting or not have a meeting, and then what they should be called. And so I actually have a colleague that has a Google Calendar plugin, and basically replaces the word meeting with review. So they just consider every meeting a review, which is pretty awesome, because it means that you're reviewing something. That means you had to bring something to the meeting for people to react to, which means that you have a prototype, which I think it's awesome. But you can take that a step further and think, is it really a review, or what is this thing that we're doing? And being intentional, which helps demonstrate the purpose, which is another meeting mantra that we have, which is never start without a clear purpose. And if you articulate your purpose really well, and it's very clear in the meeting invite, then it makes it easier for people to know if they belong or not, and you get more into this realm of respecting people's time. And I think that's really important, because if someone's just crop dusting your calendar with meetings, and they're not really providing much value, then that's not really a good situation. But if they're not clear on the purpose and and communicating that through the title, then it's really hard to know which ones to opt in and out of. So those are a few examples. I would say check out the full list of 10 mantras for more details there. But and this is stuff that typically isn't taught in school. So this is heart-wrought lessons from just being in lots of bad meetings and watching ones that are good. And so it can be a really helpful lens to take to an organization. And not only can you help shift the thinking and perspective of an organization you might join, you can also use it as criteria to decide who you want to work with. Like ask them intently about their meeting culture, ask them about how they make decisions, because it's important to interview your the company you're joining as much as it is for them to learn about you.
Mm. And I know we've all had weeks where we've had nothing but meetings in our calendar. And you get to Friday afternoon and go, you know what? I've actually not achieved anything this week. And it's those weeks where you go, I'm just going to disconnect Outlook and focus on me. That you have those real amazing steps where you create something that you feel proud of. So for someone to kind of work in this way and be really effective, really productive, not just from work, but to actually have those moments to solve problems, do you think you need a special mindset, or is that something which anyone can just pick up and do?
Well, I think all of this work tends to align with mindsets, right? Like if we're not taking the right mindset in, then we're not likely to get the big benefits, right? It's really easy to look at tactics and say, okay, I'm just going to go do these things. I make a checklist and say, well, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas like if we really embrace the principles and allow that to imbibe our way of thinking, and AKA we're adopting a mindset, then we're going to be more successful in the long run. We're going to get bigger, more profound results. And so I think there's a few different people talk about different kinds of mindsets, and I think the growth mindset is important. And then I even think empathy is a mindset, right? And it's like, sure, there's lots of empathy tools, but like if we're not truly adopting this, trying to change the way we look at the world, then the tools are going to not be very authentic, and we probably won't get the most out of them, because it's not just about like running the tool, but it's about how we analyze, synthesize, and even consider and ponder the world. Also, I think I call it the sprint mindset in the book, where you're thinking about moving with, well, we talk about quick and dirty data, and this notion that with the design sprint and any of these other, and any tools that are even kind of similar in nature, are all about time boxing, moving with quick and dirty data. This is qualitative study of users, and at a point in time when we don't have a product and market, or maybe this feature, this new kind of approach, or this new capability is not yet launched, and we don't have it to a point where we can get quantitative data. And so this isn't about A/B tests. It's not about like, data-driven decisions. And there's a real risk for people that are believers in data-driven. There's actually a risk on both sides, right? On the side where people don't believe in data or don't understand it, then they're probably just, thumb in the air, making random like decisions, and that's probably not going to serve them well unless they're insanely lucky. And then meanwhile, the people that are very data-driven are probably waiting around for perfect data, which doesn't always come, right? And until you're at scale, or maybe on your way to scale. And in these early iterations on new products, or I would say pivots to existing products, or even new capabilities of existing products, it's important to operate with quick and dirty data, this kind of test and learn mindset, where we're co-creating, working with the cross-functional team to like bring as much discovery and learning up front as possible, so we don't wait until late in the game to learn some of these things. And how can we change our behaviors and the way we work so that we can optimize toward more learning. And I think that that's a bit of a mindset shift, because whether we don't believe in data at all, or we believe data has to be statistically significant and quantitative and copious in nature, both of those things can be a disservice to us if when we're in this zone of exploration. Now, if we're exploiting something that we already know to be true, then like gobs of data really serve us, because we can really optimize and dial it in. But if we're trying to find some nascent opportunity, then we got to get into like a mode of testing and placing a lot of small risky bets. And it's just a totally different approach. And in fact, that's a reason why people will create different teams that are focused on different types of work. But that also is a slippery slope, right? Because you don't want to send the message to the entire company that only a few are allowed to innovate. But that's probably another conversation.
Yeah, quick and dirty, just trying and failing with the sprint mindset is definitely so essential for the front end, rather than trying to get everything perfect. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you're saying about empathy being so important, that I kind of feel it's the magic juice, the magic sauce, that when you look at all these things with empathy, you start to create these magical moments. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. And Jake Knapp and I have talked about this extensively, and he has some concerns with the word empathy. And I agree with the sentiment wholeheartedly. And I tend to use the word empathy because a lot of people use it and it gets thrown around. But his point is like I don't know if I'm all that. I don't know if I trust myself to truly empathize with someone else, because I feel like it requires more some really really deep training in psychology, etc. Right?
Mm.
And but the powerful thing about like the design sprint and tools like it allows us um, to have a microscope and peer into what's going on and be curious. And so, because I guess semantically speaking, his point is that if you really look at empathy, it's like really feeling deeply for someone else, and it's like, am I really doing that? and
Mm.
uh, and it's also, it's a big word, and so and it kind of encompasses a lot of things, um, and I find that really pragmatic thinking to be refreshing, because a lot of people will get I don't know, idealistic, like
Mm.
and throw things around and say it's like, oh, we're going to solve world hunger with empathy, and it's like, okay, well, how are we going to break this down, and like who are we listening to, and how can we consider what's happening and how we might design for that. And so anyway, I think it's a fascinating dialogue, and certainly one worth having,
Mm.
and it's oh so critical to not, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to hijack our ego. Is If I were to break it down, and not use like industry jargon, right? What we're
Mm.
trying to hijack our ego so that we short circuit it and shut it off just momentarily, so that we can step back and think, what's the right way to do this?
Mm.
Because our nature is to solve problems. Our brains like are constantly solving problems for us, whether it's like, I lost my keys, or like, how do I, oh wait, someone just pulled out in front of me on the road. I'm going to need to address that, right? And some problems are much easier to address than others, but there's tons of stimulus coming at us constantly, and we had to be really good at pattern matching and determining how to address this thing the world has thrown at us. And I think products and services are no different. And our ego, our brain, um, is wired to like go straight into, well, this is what we should do. And I think
Mm.
really good design processes hijack all that, short circuit it, so that we can step back and think about what's best for the person that's going to have to do this stuff. And some of my favorite, I'll come back to the buzzword. My favorite empathy tools are like, some of the, like, the day in the life of kind of stuff, right? And when I see designers walking around on their knees thinking about what it's like for a kid to be in a grocery store, that's pretty awesome, right? Because like you're trying to shift up your perspective, and what are you doing? You're hijacking your brain so that
Mm.
you kind of think about it differently. And I think a lot of it comes down to perception and observation, and even in my latest book, Start Within, we talk a lot about assumptions, and often it's about how do we bust some assumptions, because the sneaky thing about assumptions is the most deep rooted ones feel like the truth.
Mm. So right now, everyone's facing so many emotional problems. We're stuck here, we're worried about what's going to happen next, what we're going to do. And there's been this massive shift in consumerism from, at least in the UK, a culture which is all about buying, to more experience and trying to stay mentally okay. Um, Yet when you look at so much of design and the products we work on, it's all got this real consumerism focus, and it's about making products that sell, make money in some way. So do you think that design can actually, like this kind of sprint mentality, can really play a part of how society recovers at the moment? Or are we just the tools of industry?
Well, that's a philosophical question.
Mm.
I love it. Here's the thing: if we are truly honing the craft, I think it can. But if we are just taking an online course or reading the book and just doing things verbatim and checking boxes, I don't think it will serve us well. To your point, a lot of the practices have been developed so that, like, for Google Ventures startup portfolios, these are consumer startups. But we've seen AI companies use design sprints. We've worked with a lot of like physical services, and as I was mentioning, even HR teams are starting to point the tools inward, so they're not even faced to clients and customers. They're forced to, in like how we design our employee experience, and how teams relate and work with each other, which is phenomenal. Um, so the thing is we have to really get down to the principles, the mindsets, and shake off the checklist and the I would say the practices. And if we do that, then we can use it for all sorts of purposes, as long as we're clear on the purpose. So when everyone comes together, they know what we're even here for and what we're trying to accomplish. And again, I joked about solving world hunger earlier, and that is a concern. Is if we have the aperture too wide, it can be very detrimental to driving outcomes. And I think that's one thing people struggle with a lot when they're trying to innovate, because they fear that constraints will limit them. But as you know, design constraints are very powerful because they point us down a path. And we just had to be really careful as stewards about selecting the path that we want to explore. And I think that's where opportunity will come from.
I think one of the biggest constraints which I see most often is you have some great idea, whatever it is. It could be just reorganizing the menu on a website. It could be a new kind of product. And there are these historic company rules where for some reason it's just, you can't do that. Which leads us right into next thing I want to talk about. So you got a new book with Karen Holst. So Start Within, How to Sell Your Idea, Overcome Roadblocks, and Love Your Job. And the way it reads on Amazon, it's got a lot to live up to. So beware, this book removes all the reasons, excuses, and obstacles between you and launching your idea in your organization. So what advice can you give about overcoming these kind of business roadblocks?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there in the book. It's like really got a lot of cool activities. Every chapter's got at least one. Some have 3 or 4, and where individuals can start to unpack some of this stuff and find those answers. Because for us, it's less about a prescriptive, go do this exact thing, and here are the things you need to think about and go explore. So we don't really call it stakeholder analysis per se, but from one design thinker to another, like that's a big part of it, right? Like if we go and we understand the gatekeepers to these obstacles, that can be really powerful, because then we understand, because these rules might sound arbitrary on the surface, but if we unpack it, we might understand why they are what they are. Like if we see the troll that you have to pay a toll, and from a distance, it's like, well, why do some people get to cross the bridge and some other people don't? But upon further analysis, you might realize that, oh, well, yeah, they're paying a toll to get across. And so if you understand what the toll is, it's much easier to pay it. Also, sometimes, like we give this analogy of Monopoly and house rules, where, if you grew up playing Monopoly at your family, and there was some interesting rules about how you collect money and when you get sent to jail and stuff, and you go to another house and play with another family with your friend, and they don't have those rules, and you try to enforce those rules, that's gonna be painful. And so if you go into a new company and you're trying to enforce rules from your old company, or not understanding the rules that they have there, that can seem to be very challenging and frustrating. But the simple thing to do is just to observe and learn and play within the rules. Now, maybe your goal is to change the rules because you think that the new rules would make stuff more fun or create more opportunity. That's totally fine. That's completely a worthwhile idea and thing to pursue. But our warning is that if you choose that as your change, you should not be simultaneously pushing some other change, because they're both going to be a lot of hard work. And so part of it's like constraining your work so that you're really focused on what it is that you're trying to have happen. And if you and then also another thing is, if you think about, like, let's say you have even you're putting together a puzzle, and because that's essentially a very nice analogy to when you're navigating a big company, you're having to put together a puzzle of like, here are all these different players, the roles they play, and how it all fits together. Well, now, and you see an opportunity, a gap in that puzzle. There's a puzzle piece that's missing, and you've drawn out this puzzle piece, and it doesn't it doesn't really completely fit, and you're just trying to jam it in there. Then, like, your outcome's going to be, it's never going to work. But if instead you're looking at the gap and studying the gap, and constantly tweaking and changing your puzzle piece until it fits in perfectly, then that's how you complete the puzzle. And it's no different with your idea. You might have assumptions about how it should work, but the more you understand your organization, the more you understand the customer, the more you can kind of tweak it and design it to fit. And that's really critical. Instead of trying to change the organization to fit your idea, you change your idea to fit the organization. And that's everything from these obstacles that you run into, to getting your manager's approval, to like making sure it aligns with the business objectives. Because if you're trying to, like, if your idea is all about growth, but like the company objective right now is all about profit, then that's going to be problematic, right? Because usually growth makes profit suffer. And if we concentrate on profit, often growth suffers. It's hard to do both at the same time. But if you have a growth focused idea, and the company's objective is profit right now, then how do you take your growth idea and make sure it doesn't like negatively impact profit? Because otherwise it's going to get shot down. And so the point is, like, it's living inside an ecosystem. So understanding the ecosystem really, really thoroughly is critical. And so kind of touched on a lot of different chapters there, but I think that those insights are maybe the most critical, is just understanding kind of the house rules, the ecosystem, how things get done, and work with inside that.
That's a really valuable insight. I know that lots of designers, when they're entering industry in the whole sphere of design, walk in with this idea that if you just have a good enough idea, of course the CEO will see it, and of course they'll like it, and it'll change everything. And then they get slammed with this business culture that they haven't yet learned to navigate. So anything we can do to really help them get through must be a positive. So obviously writing a book is quite a personal journey, and you get time to reflect on things you may have had in the back of your mind but never quite got out before. What would you say you're most proud of from writing your latest book?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess maybe in one regard, just getting it done. It's like so much work. And yeah. But gosh, the most proud of, well, maybe pride's not the right word. I just been I really appreciated the opportunity to work with Karen. She's such a delight, and always really thoughtful and creative. And so I guess I'm proud to have worked with her, but I definitely feel it more as appreciation.
And that's a wonderful thing. So to finish off, I've got sort of one last thing I'd like to ask you, because we've talked a lot about the idea of like solving world hunger, making the world a better place, overcoming challenges, and kind of seeing quite a positive future in adversity. And obviously working with Karen is a wonderful thing to do. So if you could say there's one thing you can imagine that would make the world a better place, what do you think it might be?
Wow. Gosh, I'll just beat that drum on meetings. I think If we could just improve meetings, I'm so convinced that it's going to have such major ripple effects. And the thing I love about it is like whether it's stemming systemic racism or helping us solve COVID faster or just getting people to understand each other a little bit more. Like meetings that are well designed can help with all those things because everyone has meetings. And so if you think about us applying design thinking principles, applying principles from, FBI negotiators and, architectural design charrettes and, social good and social equality type of psychologists that are designing experiences where people can be safer and have conversations that are, challenging. And if we apply all of this science and all of this, thinking and principles and mindsets to the everyday meetings, could have a tremendous ripple effect throughout the entire world. And so that's kind of where I've been focused and operating, and I'm convinced that we can make a big change. And because to me, I see so many opportunities to make the world better. And so it's hard for me to choose. And so I think I gravitated on something that impacts all of those things. And so if I can be an enabler for the people that are doing all the work that matters, then that's what it gets me really excited.
Yeah. Well, society definitely needs it. We're looking at all these things happening right now. It's just Black Lives Matter is the sort of flag that's bringing everyone together on this. I still seeing people who don't get it, and you kind of look at this wondering, how can we reach out to these people and communicate in a way where we actually learn from it? And again, that's quite a philosophical way down.
Yeah. We're working with Greg Sattel on a workshop for Cascades, and I think his book is phenomenal. So definitely check out that book. It addresses the question you just raised. And so specifically, the spectrum of allies. So the concept is that on the spectrum of allies, on one end, you've got people that are actively supporting you. On the other end, you've got people that are actively opposing you. Now, it's not binary. A lot of people think of it like people either support me or they don't. And in fact, there's people that are like just somewhat support you. So if you start acting differently and changing your message, you might lose them, or you might make them stronger supporters. Like it's ebbs and flows. It's fungible. And likewise, you got people that only mildly oppose you. And so you can think about pulling them into your group of supporters. So the methodology is to start with the people that are actively supporting you and make sure that you're supporting them and that you give them what they need. And the way you bring people into this group of actively supporting is by listening, by understanding what about it that's making, like if you know really well, like why they're only mildly supporting you, then you'll be armed with information around how to get them to support you more thoroughly. And a lot of it comes down to shared values. So rather than just saying that, hey, this is what's really important to me right now, and this is why, like understanding how to get them excited and how to move them into maybe a more mobilized or a more active supporting role. And it generally comes down to whatever pushes them strongly and that they're passionate about, right? And generally there's something about what you're trying to do that aligns. So as to your point around like just as a designer or anyone new or just idealistic, you don't even have to be young. There's plenty of people that are older and idealistic, like, right? Like you look at like Occupy Wall Street. They never got past the ideals. If they would have gotten to really sharp values that then they could kind of find that aligns with other groups that are not necessarily like their core group, then that's where things get really powerful, because you've got these cross sections of groups that are all standing for these values, and the movement gets so resilient and strong that it's impossible to deny it. And so that's, I think, what you can do inside of organizations, or if whether you're doing some public work, if you're seeking to find those that are not just showing up to your rally and your event, but what are these other groups that you can bring in because you have some sort of tie, some sort of shared value that you can tap into. And that's really hard work, because you got to think creatively about, like, okay, well, what are these other groups and sections of community that we can bring in, as long as we understand what they value, what's important to them, and how that aligns with our work. And then if you can do that, that is super powerful, and it will move people's hearts and minds.
And that's a really fantastic place to end today, sort of moving hearts and minds. So we covered loads of topics today, and I reckon we could just keep talking for hours. It's been absolutely fascinating. So if listeners want to find out more about you or read some of your books, where's the best place to see you?
Yeah, they can find me at voltagecontrol.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. So reach out to me. I love to connect, and I'm all about human connection and meeting people and hearing what people are all about. So please reach out. And everything's at voltagecontrol.com, whether you want to check out my podcast or my blog, and the books are all linked there as well, and available on Amazon too. So check them out. And I love feedback. I'd love to hear from folks. So definitely say hi.
Another huge thank you to Douglas Ferguson for being our guest here tonight on the UX Usability Podcast. Next Tuesday night, we are diving into the fundamentals every UX designer needs to be successful in landing their dream role. Thanks for listening, have a great night, and we'll be seeing you really soon.